It's it's 3:30 in the morning, man. I shouldn't do this to myself. Now I have seen the new trailers from Comic-Con, you know, the Wonder Woman trailer, the frickin' Justice League trailer, and if you want me to talk about it, sure. I'm not a big trailer guy, but you know, if you want to hear my opinions, which you probably don't, it's just trailers anyways. So yeah, let's get into the review, man. The Shop Around the Corner, easily one of the most famous screwball comedies ever, and just like one of the most famous films from the 40s in general. Stars Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart, and they made tons of movies together. And Margaret Sullivan plays Clara. James Stewart plays a guy named Alfred, and they work in a little shop together, and there are quarrels and love and hate and, you know, good old screwball shit, man. Here's the thing with screwball comedy. Screwball comedy in itself was such a revelation in 40s Hollywood and 30s Hollywood. It was such an anarchistic approach. I've always talked about this. It was such a new and exciting way of making movies and making a style of dialogue that they just poured in. Suddenly, a revolution of a style became a trend, and way too many films started to come out every year. Tons and tons and tons of films, from like probably more than like 100 films that were all just screwball comedies, and because of there was so many, a lot of them were forgotten, and for good reason. Sometimes you just didn't have a good script. Maybe you just didn't have a good chemistry between the actors. Maybe the chemistry between the actors was so overused in other films that it just didn't work on the fifth collaboration. So it would make sense that most of them would be forgettable. And like any gems within a revolution of a style, you need to have a certain personality trait in order to shine from within this crowd of the revolution. The revolution is just a phase. You need to stand out once again within the personalities. And there's a reason why The Shop Around the Corner is such a critically acclaimed film, even though it might not seem at first, because here's the thing, the film starts very clumsily. It feels more like a stage play. The dialogue is kind of stilted, the acting is kind of stilted, it kind of like fumbles towards the story. It really does not work. In the first 10 minutes, you're kind of frustrated. The acting's really not great. Okay, James Stewart, he's my favorite actor of all time. And even he kind of feels crooked, like he feels too stiff. And then there's this one scene where they talk about this cigarette or a cigar box that plays a song whenever it opens up. And in this scene, suddenly everything is fleshed out. Suddenly the energy comes back. Suddenly the dialogue fleshes out every single one of the characters. You have the insecure boss who needs opinions of others to form a choice, you know. You got the cheery guy who's overly cheery and annoying as fuck. And you got our main character, Alfred, played by James Stewart, who's the modern day cynic. In which is basically every single one of his characters, but still, he's such a good, like, you know what's great about James Stewart? Back in the day, it was all about being tough, being a thug, being, you know, kind of smoking a cigar, and looking cool and wearing a hat like Humphrey Bogart. That was all it was. Or you need to be like the romantic type. Ooh, I'm Cary Grant. Ooh, I'm, frickin' Clark Gable, you know, something like that. James Stewart played the cynic. Like, he saw through the bullshit in every single one of his movies. If you watch a film like The Philadelphia Story, you can see him being annoyed with the slightest bullshit that's happening, and that's why he's so great. In this film, because he's playing a cynic, it just makes perfect sense. The acting suddenly becomes great. Everything he says becomes witty and funny. Just a great performance overall. And then we get the addition of Clara, played by Margaret Sullivan, who's actually more of an independent type of woman character within the film. And suddenly these two strong characters collide in this absolutely ugly state, and suddenly the screwball comedy becomes, you know, absolute. Because here's the thing, comedy needs conflict. Comedy needs pain. Comedy needs emotional pain. And because suddenly there's this huge conflict going on, the film suddenly becomes alive. And that's how the film suddenly becomes funny. And that's why it does stand out as a screwball comedy. It actually kind of builds up to the comedy and not just throw a joke at you suddenly at once. Now, but that's just, that'll be enough for making it a very good movie. But what makes it so special? Well, there is definitely a strangely somber and sober tone to this film. And here's the thing, films like His Girl Friday or Bringing Up Baby, those two are like easily some of my favorite films of all time, and just two of my favorite screwball comedies of all time. But those films were straight up comedies. There wasn't really a moment where there's this great sense of mourning and dread. It was usually a very fast-paced, dialogue-driven comedy. This film actually takes some time to give some weight to the situation, to actually make the characters contemplate what's going on, contemplate about their actions, and actually go into deeper and darker places into their mind. It deals with an issue that they didn't really talk about in the 40s, and that's the isolation within modern society, the isolation in city life. And because there are so many aspects of this isolation aspect, they go through a lot. There's this great scene where one of the characters is talking to his wife on the phone, and he said, "Oh, I have to work late, so we don't need to have dinner with those pesky neighbors." Suddenly there's this theme of isolation within neighbors. It is very common. There's also a bit of adultery in this film. We also get into depression. There's a fucking suicide scene in this. In the 40s, that's rare. You don't get to see a lot of suicide scenes in the 40s. 40s is the golden era of Hollywood. Jolly musicals and comedies and thugs smoking cigarettes like Humphrey Bogart with the hat tilted and all that shit. There was this romanticism back then. Suddenly in this film, we get a fucking suicide scene. And it's not abrupt. It builds up to that dreadful, dark moment. And it just brings enough light into the film. The film brings enough light back into the story to actually make it a good transition towards a romantic ending. The flow of the film is absolutely amazing. It's so natural, and yet it goes from here, absolute joy and comedy, to here, to there, into the depths of hell. It deals with such dark, modern topics, and I think that's why it really is kind of a revolutionary film, even within screwball comedy. A genre that really didn't like dealing with extremely dark issues. Maybe family issues, but not psychological issues and, societal issues. So I think that's why it's so special. Are there flaws? Yes. Now, the filmmaking style hasn't aged well. We're not talking about Hitchcock level of filmmaking here. Let's face it. It's the 40s. The style is kind of stilted. It's very stiff. The visual storytelling element is not there at all. Outside the screenplay, the film kind of is a very stale film when it comes to technical aspects. Also, the ending has a strangely, subtly mean tone to it. Suddenly, the Margaret Sullavan character, Clara, suddenly has this strangely, I think the only word I can think of is mean. She suddenly has this mean tone, and I don't get it. It suddenly comes out of nowhere within the dialogue. But outside of that, I can see why this is a classic. For now, it's a 3.5 out of 4, at least for me, but I can see myself watching this film again and kind of forgiving those slight flaws, because I'm just nitpicky like that, and loving it. Just like how I love freaking Bringing Up Baby and the Philadelphia Story and all those films. So yeah, 3.5 out of 4, but don't make that, it's probably a 4 out of 4 film, quite frankly. If you like screwball comedies, go check it out. It's great. I mean, James Stewart, how wrong can you get, honestly. So yeah, 3.5 out of 4, the shop around the corner. If you want me to talk about the Comic-Con trailers and whatnot, let me know. So yeah, bye. I need to fucking sleep.